What is it, Master?
This is a land of dreams and madness. Children's stories come to life.
I know no such stories.
You weren't raised at the temple. Stories of this galaxy are considered folk tales. Some ancient past, long forgotten.
With good reason. Sometimes stories are just stories.
If you ever wonder why security cameras weren't utilized on the Death Star, go ahead and smash that like and subscribe button. Guys, you're certainly in the right place because today we're going to be taking a deep dive into this theory I've thought of way too much during my free time. Peridea was truly a leap for the current Star Wars canon as it stands. For those of you who may not know, Star Wars changed forever during the Disney acquisition, and during that same acquisition, all Star Wars novels, games, etc., besides the main 6 films in the Clone Wars TV show, were declared not canon, or in other words, legends. You might recognize Legends for those golden banners you see in some of the Star Wars novels. Legends spans almost 40,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, and during those new Legends deemed timelines, a lot of different travel did indeed take place. Recently we talked about the instance where the Outbound Flight Project did attempt to have Jedi, along with 30,000 regular people, move over to another galaxy. Something that was daunting but ultimately failed at the hands of the greed of Jorah Sabaoth. So with that being said, Peridea, as you can see, is a huge leap for Star Wars canon, as this is the first time we see our heroes in canon, and also villains, take a step outside the known universe. And if you look closely at the Star Wars galaxy map above, you can see that Peridea is not charted there, because clearly it's in another galaxy. So to visualize this, Peridea also extends beyond wild space and beyond the unknown regions. So why is Peridea this huge deal to me? Well, simply put, it's because it's in the unknown. The unknown regions, as charted on the galaxy map, are rumored to have enemies like the mysterious Chiss and even reports of the Yuuzhan Vong. But these adjacent galaxies were simply really unknown to those in the known galaxy. And as mentioned during the events of Ahsoka, the only beings moving out of the galaxy were the Purrgil, you know, those giant space whales. And they moved there to live out their final days until their death. So again, this enticement of the true unknown is something intriguing to the audience, but scary for our characters because where you can get lost in the unknown regions or wild space, you're at least in the same galaxy, and you have a better chance of succeeding charting your way back. When traveling to Peridea, the likelihood errs on the side that you aren't going to return. Now, Ahsoka used the power of the Force to will the Purrgil to work in her favor, and the Night Sisters had to communicate across magic, across space and time, and build a special hyperspace ring known as the Eye of Sion to move from the known galaxy to this other galaxy. Peridea becomes intriguing because it's explained as the home of the ancient Night Sisters. Their statues stand tall and ominously over the barren lands, and there seems to be really nothing there. Comparatively to Legends, and as mentioned before, Yuuzhan Vong were an enemy that lay outside the unknown regions, and rumored to also be present in those other galaxies. The Chiss and Thrawn fear the Yuuzhan Vong greatly, to the point where it was speculated that Thrawn, when confronting the Outbound Flight Project, wanted the project to turn back, not only to preserve Chiss sovereignty, but also to avoid triggering the awareness and presence of this ancient enemy and threat. In addition to that, according to Thrawn's canon novelizations, Thrawn's enrollment into the Imperial Navy was of no coincidence. Rather, he sought to grow in the Imperial Navy and befriend Palpatine, as to perhaps garner Imperial support in the anticipation of the greater war and threat outside of Chiss space, something that Palpatine was also wary of, but not exactly pressed about either. So, back to the topic at hand, how does this tie into Mortis and Peridea exactly? And beyond that, what is Mortis exactly? We've all thought Mortis is a planet, but maybe it's just an illusion. So for this, I did a little bit of digging because I always thought of Mortis as a planet. But according to StarWars.com, Mortis, which is located in a somewhat uncharted region of space, is an ethereal place that defies conventional description. Having speculated on this prior, I was already theorizing that, maybe Mortis is not what it seems. After all, we have Peridea, Mortis, and the World Between Worlds all existing on the same timeline, and the same canon within the same timeframes of each other. Before we dig into that, we we need to dig a little bit more into what Mortis is based on the canon knowledge available to us. And again, according to StarWars.com, and in reference to the Mortis arc where Anakin, Obi, and Ahsoka visit Mortis, I found a quote where it describes Mortis as an immense monolith appearing in the Corelithium system, broadcasting an ancient Jedi distress code. StarWars.com further goes on to state that our heroes were drawn into the monolith, calling it a quote, paradise realm inhabited by unspeakably powerful force wielders. And lastly, on this realm or planet existed the Mortis gods. And we all know more or less how these events played out between Anakin, Ahsoka, father, son, and daughter. But to tie Mortis a little bit closer to Peridea, we have to examine where exactly the Corelithium system was located. So for this, I did have to make some assumptions as the Star Wars Galaxy map have different editions, but this one was pretty easy. So up top we can see that Mortis is mapped out around coordinate K2. Now again, it's important to keep in mind that this is where Anakin, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan responded to that distress signal and encountered the monolith. And as we recall, once they're on Mortis, we don't really know where they go after, if they're in a dream sequence, or if they're just simply transported somewhere else at the will of the Mortis gods. And when digging deeper, I looked into the Star Wars Atlas as well, and also discovered that the Nab system on planet Cetos, where Ahsoka and Thrawn were both to have alleged to have left from there to Peridea, well, at least on this map, it's pretty far away from where Mortis is. And also, when we take a look at the galaxy map that Lady Morgan finds, it shows the path to Peridea seems to start from the known galaxy with a direct route exiting the top left of the galaxy map. So we really can't link too much in terms of physical location between Mortis and Cetos, at least on the Star Wars Galaxy map. However, things do become interesting when we begin to tie together some other elements that suggest that Mortis and Peridea are actually the same place. So let's dive into those parallels and similarities. The Mortis signal leads our heroes to Mortis. And importantly here, we find out that the distress signal is 2,000 years old, stemming from ancient Jedi. This timeline places us in a rather unknown era. However, the very first general clue is the mysteriousness of the matter. This code traces back to a time lost and is unbeknownst to our heroes. Peridea, on the same hand, is a place that is simply lost in the annals of history. A second clue we could draw from comes in the form of possible magic being at play. During the events of Ahsoka, magic is used in part to plot a course to Peridea, between the communication of the Night Sisters to its actual application. Now that might sound controversial, but the Mortis gods are just that. We could very well say users of the Force are also users of magic as well. And it's been noted in several places that magic is a form of the Force, or rather a different interpretation used by non-classical people. During the Mortis arc, we're greeted by these same gods and see them transform into other forms of themselves, literally, like in the example above, where the daughter turns into a griffin. On Peridea, though not in abundance, we're greeted by these ancient Night Sisters, practicing an assumed darker and stronger form of magic. But more evidently, during the shots we're given of Peridea, we're also greeted by, again, those large, ominous statues. Being that this is an ancient place where the Night Sisters formed a long time ago, one might say that this place was also as magic abundant as Mortis. Another major hint, and it's the most obvious one, comes in the form of statues. Mortis god statues simply exist in Peridea in their grandeur. Jedi didn't seem to revere these Mortis gods as much as to have their statues abundantly placed, but whoever was on this planet certainly did as well. And more importantly than just the presence of the statue, is the direction that the statue points in, more specifically the Father. In this scene, BAYLAN'S stands atop the outstretched arm of the Father and points away into the distance. And this here is our bigger clue. The outstretched arm points at a shimmer in the distance, similar to what our heroes see during their visit to Mortis in the Clone Wars. In addition, the fact that Mortis appears initially to our heroes as this monolith in space is also another clue, which looks way too similar to a Thoyor. And that suggests that this monolith either moves and transports our heroes elsewhere. It's also abundantly clear that Mortis is not at the location on the map mentioned above before. Rather, that's where the contact with the Mortis monolith was made. And just to backpedal for a moment, for those of you who don't know, the Thoyor were ancient ships that transported the first Force users to Tython some 40,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. Ironically, these numerous Thoyor also appeared out of nowhere. Very coincidental. And for some other supplemental hints worth noting, we can also take a look at the landscape here, as there are similarities between Peridea and Mortis. And besides the landscape, we can also look at Ahsoka's calmness on the planet towards the end. We've seen Ahsoka in perilous situations before. During the events of Ahsoka, she experienced shock, anger, and sadness when she meets Anakin again in the World Between Worlds.
Incorrect.
But for some reason on Peridea, all seems to be just fine. Was it because she was reborn after the World Between Worlds? Is she being comforted in spirit by the Morai? Or could it really be attributed to our last big clue that suggests that Mortis and Peridea are one and the same? Anakin Skywalker appears to Ahsoka on Peridea. Now the World Between Worlds, in my opinion, cannot really be counted as an appearance to Ahsoka, I would say in a sense, because Anakin doesn't appear to Ahsoka in the real world. He appears in the World Between Worlds, as I just said. And specifically through all the trials Ahsoka goes through during the World Between Worlds, and even though Anakin does in essence appear to her in that realm, it's not the physical realm. And the first place that Anakin appears again to Ahsoka is on Peridea, and I don't think it's a coincidence that he does this. During the events of the Clone Wars, as we've noted before, Anakin experiences his past, present, and future in one large motion. He has these divine epiphanies, and it's foreseen by the Mortis gods that Anakin is the chosen one, even though they also see his future as Vader. And that perhaps is also hinting that he is in essence the father of the Force, or the balance, as the prophecy foretells the balance. It would make most sense that Anakin would appear again to Ahsoka on Mortis of Peridea, because that is where he saved Ahsoka's life too. We cannot forget that last crucial point. So while we can't definitively connect Mortis and Peridea through simple coordinates on a map, we're definitely given something to think about here when realizing that the Mortis location is highly unlikely to be the location of Mortis. Rather, just a means to go to Mortis. Because to recap, Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka travel to the Monolith, and the Monolith is where they make contact and is the proposed location of Mortis on the Star Wars Galaxy map. Where this theory really shines is when we start to speculate of the similarities mentioned before, ranging from the father's hands pointing outwards towards the same structure and shimmer we see in both Peridea and Mortis, ranging all the way to the concept that Anakin appears to Ahsoka on Peridea for a very specific purpose, and at a very coincidental time. But I want to know what your guys' thoughts are on this very interesting and deep dive of a Star Wars theory. Do you believe what I believe, that Mortis and Peridea are the same place? Did our heroes already visit Peridea unknowingly? And what exactly does this mean for the future of Star Wars going forward? For those of you who listen to this crazy theory, thanks for sticking around. For more Star Wars theory content, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, smash that like button because it supports the long form content, and remember, the Force will be with you always.